Good morning, everybody. The forgotten art, or is it science, or is it just magic? Archiving and the word decommissioning. So looking at what I'm going to do today. Why is this not working? There it goes. Very quickly, 2 minutes on the company, then focus on the benefits of archiving, what that means in S4 migration, and then some costed examples, and then summarizing everything I've said about. Okay, so the history, TJC has been around since 1997 when it was set up in France by the Thierry Julien, who is the founder and still the president, right through to where we are today. On the way through, we have developed several pieces of software which automate archiving and the various activities around that. We now have over 500 clients worldwide. We're SAP Silver Partners. We have offices in France, where the company started, UK, Germany, and TJC India, where we have a lot of development resource. The company itself has 12 different softwares, tools, which are all add-ins, etc. I'm not going to focus on those. This is not a sales pitch. I'm going to focus on what we do in archiving. So why does one do archiving or decommissioning? Because it saves time, money, and it mitigates risk. Most importantly, those areas are what I want to focus on today. When you come to migration, most people in the marketplace have 3 ways of doing it: greenfield, brownfield, and then the conversion. The greenfield approach, and I must say there was a very recent article by SAP saying that this method is no longer being followed because of the complexity of it. And also, if you take the SAP time frame of 2025 for end of life for existing systems before going to S4, there is a very close, it's too short a time to achieve everything that they say you need to achieve. But if you do take the greenfield approach, it's an all new implementation. You don't migrate old processes over, you just learn what you want to do and create new processes in the new system, and you go forward on your new system and you bring your old system to an end of life, which is where the decommissioning comes in. Brownfield, which seems to be the way most people are working, you migrate data across, not all of it, but some of it. You make the best use of your existing knowledge, and it maintains the millions of pounds you've already invested in your SAP environment, and you migrate as much of that across as you can do. So in simple terms, the brownfield seems to be where a lot of people are focused. The full conversion, I had a client who's picked up absolutely everything that is in R3 ECC, picked it up, moved it, and put it into an S4 environment. They were due to go live on the 1st of November. They actually go live on the 1st of December. So they've had a month slippage, but it's probably the most expensive option. I didn't know anybody was going to do this, but they are a telco, so they've got a lot of money, and they absolutely moved the whole lot, which takes away the problem of risk from future compliancy. You're not looking at an old system. How much do I keep? What do I decommission? You literally have everything you used to have, and it's a new system, same processes, and you go forward in the new world. They used SAP as the consultants to, and their own people to do that. So greenfield, new installation; brownfield, a mix of migrating; conversion, a total transformation from one to the other. Each option can bring benefits from archiving or decommissioning. So looking at the archiving value points, where can you save money? Archiving reduces data volume. It doesn't take a genius to tell you that, but the knock-on effect is it will save in your storage environment, the maintenance, the licensing. It saves on the administration. When you archive, your data becomes secure, because you may not know this, but if you make a change in ECC, say a vendor changes address, and you make that change in ECC, if you're asked to reproduce from the system the invoice, you can't reproduce it with the old data. You can only produce it with the new information that's been put there. So when you come to compliancy, you cannot actually reproduce information that has changed in between. Whereas when you archive down, you secure that data against what was there in the system at the time. And that can be very, depending on your environment, depending on your compliancy requirements, that can be quite useful. The data is locked against the time period. And when you archive down, you do retain for the controlled periods. Now there are two periods: the residency, how long you're going to keep it in the system, and then the retention. Once it's been archived, how long do you keep it? GDPR rules apply there, taxation rules, regulatory rules all apply. But one of the benefits of putting it into archive, the archive file is no longer readable by anything but the originating system unless manipulation is carried out by the administrator. So in a way, those files are unhackable. People cannot see them. If they get into your storage system, they cannot tell what's in there, because those files are blobs rather than structured as an archive. So to give a bit of numbers, there is a company over in Scandinavia, in Denmark, called Carlsberg, and they have very kindly allowed me to put some facts and figures up. We started work with Carlsberg in 2015. I think it was December, if I remember. I can't remember exactly when we started. But the problem they had is they had, I think it was 23 countries with 16 systems, and they were merging everything together into a central, what we used to call big SAP installation. When they did the first wave, they found the volume of data they were migrating was so large, they could not do the follow-on waves. They had to do something about the volume of data they were bringing in, because their centralized system just didn't have the capacity to store it all. So there was a whole series, as you can see on the left in the chart, a whole series of archiving objects that were set up in several systems: ECC, CRM, APO, EWM, and Solman. And in December 2015, we managed to take out of their database 2.7 terabytes. Moving forward to more recently, so we've now got a nearly 4-year period, we've actually today taken out 18.26 terabytes from their live database, which is, you can see the graph, the green is what it would have been if they hadn't have done it, and the yellow or the gold is where it's sitting. So that's a saving in that period of 15 terabytes over the time. So that's a saving in the live system, but they also have a mirror DR site. So you've saved the same in the DR site. Then you've got a full copy in pre-prod. Not everybody does, but most people do. So you've saved 15 terabytes there. And then proportionally, when you go down your landscape into quality and development, so we said we've maybe saved 50 terabytes. Carlsberg said, no, you've saved in excess of 50 terabytes, which is good to get that validation. Most clients don't have the numbers to tell you and don't want to tell you. They like the company to be confidential, but they've been kind enough to allow me to make this presentation to you. So if you've taken out 50 terabytes and you think about the storage, in Carlsberg, they had a Hitachi data system. I think it was 100 terabytes. If they hadn't done the archiving, then they would have had to move into a second storage frame, plus all the disks that go in it. And that storage frame was about €1 million in round numbers. So by doing the archiving and not moving and expanding their storage, they've saved A, the hardware costs, B, the maintenance and the licensing, and then you've got all the other add-ons, the administration, the people who look after it. Those costs are significant. Now, most companies don't put a number against per gigabyte. And if you look at that at £50, call it euros, per gigabyte, you're into 2.5 million of savings. Even if your company is not as complex as Carlsberg and doesn't use the sophistication of the storage SAN and everything, that number, even if it was £25, half, you're still talking over £1 million of savings in just taking data out in a proper way, automating that and running it through. I hope that makes sense, because that's a key saving. I'll come on to the migration in a moment.
Lawrence, just a quick question, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Those savings that you're talking about, are they one-time savings or are they recurring? So
well, the saving, the one thing with archiving is you have the cost up front, but once you start to get into the long-term archiving, which is where Carlsberg, and they've been doing this for 4 years now, they are saving more and more as time goes on, because there is, if you look at on this sheet, that yellow line is barely growing. So there at the moment, and you'll see there is a couple of on the chart, you can see some red dots, which means those objects have been temporarily stopped for a purpose. There may be someone's making changes. I don't know the reason why they're stopped, but on various occasions and various audits, you need to stop archiving and just halt it on a particular object. If they were all running at full steam, that yellow line will basically be level, and therefore what they're putting in, they're taking out at the back end into archive. They're not losing any data. It doesn't go anywhere other than it's not in the live database, which means the efficiency and the performance of the database is held for this purpose at the best it can be. If you don't do this and you were running where the green line is, if you could imagine every time you place a query, you've got to go through 50 terabytes more of that. Do you understand what I mean? Each pile of data, whether it's invoices, instead of having 18 months online, which is what Carlsberg do, you've got 8 years online. It takes longer for the index to search to find what you need, blah, blah, blah. And if you don't do that, your system will slow down, your performance will go down, and depending on the impact in your business, that can be quite significant. And for Carlsberg, up front, the problem was this: they armed all their salespeople with iPads, so they could go into bars and hotels where all their customers are to take the orders for their beverages. And the system was running so slow, the iPad people remotely could not get the orders in. They were having to come back to the office and upload them off of central computers very slowly. So the application of the mobile mobile app for ordering was causing a problem, and they were literally losing business, not processing. That was one of the key drivers for them. But in itself, the project has produced this saving in these other areas, and there are things in there that are not measured. I cannot tell you how much power they've saving on energy storage. But not only do you save on that, you also, in most professional data rooms, you've got humidity reducers going on, you've got air conditioning going on. There's all sorts of power being consumed. If you haven't got that many disks or as many disks running, as much processing going on, then you keep that whole cost down. And in the green world we're in, it's starting to become something that we should all be being more contemplative of, if I can keep it like that, so I'm not political. But the key thing is every company has its own profile. We cannot say because we did this in Carlsberg or anybody else that you're going to make the same savings, but there are indicators here. And if you start thinking about this now and just taking a broad view, you don't have to get to the detail. You can start to see what the value is now. And when we come to talking about migration, we'll see the impact at that point in time. Is that all right, Martin?
Yeah, I guess what you're saying is yes then.
Yes, sorry, that was a politician's answer. Yes, yes, I could have done it in one word. Thank you.
Thanks.
So decommissioning, to make sure everybody understands that we're all on the same understanding what it is decommissioning. When you migrate to S4, you will be left with an ECC6 system, presumably, or something along those lines, which no longer is needed after a period of time. Typically, that will be 1 year, and you will find that the queries on the old system, they fall away very rapidly. And therefore, rather than leave it there in the computer room, sitting there, not being accessed for anything but queries, it's a good idea to decommission that, because depending on your relationship with SAP, you're going to have heavy licensing costs. It still has to be administrated. The operating system it sits on still needs to be maintained, etc., etc. But also, if you take the system out, you no longer have to back it up. That also helps all your restoration times if you need to reload anything from it, and all of those costs that come from decommissioning, but some of those also apply to archiving, of course. They all have an impact on keeping your overall costs down. The thing is understanding that those costs apply, and it's not just a case of looking at disks, which are 1 terabyte disks, they cost £300 or 55 euros, whatever it costs. That's how some people consider the cost of data, but it's not. It's all of these infrastructure costs that come with it. So I put some figures together for a simple example of a client with a 14 terabyte database, and he's going to move to S4 HANA. The move to HANA itself, because the HANA database is a column-based database, not a call it a line, the relational database in itself removes the need for some of the metadata, and that itself can reduce a typical database to something like 9 terabytes just by that move to HANA. But if you were to apply standard archiving tools to that, then it's reasonable you would expect a good 40%, if not 50% reduction in the 9 terabytes before you move it to 5 terabytes. Did that make sense? Hope so. Therefore, I took, because we're all going to cloud and most people are trying to put everything on cloud these days, I tried to take a comparison. So you've moved onto HANA, you've moved 9 terabytes because you didn't do any archiving, and it's going to cost you 300,000 euros. And I took an average of different cloud suppliers to try and give a reasonable figure in the market. So if you do the archiving, the standard archiving on the ECC before you move over, you will reduce that 9 down to say 5. The cost of the 5 on the cloud is only 173,000. So therefore, looking at that, the annual saving is 128,000 euros. And that's just by doing some archiving. Over 5 years, you've saved well over €500,000. Now, if you start thinking now about traditional archiving, that will prepare you ready for going to S4, where a lot of people will be hosted on the cloud, etc., and you will save money. If you're going to be on premises and buy your own memory blocks, those memory blocks in the UK are best part of £250,000 each. If you needed 3, but by archiving you only need 2, you've saved £250,000. And the truth is that you're going to be burning and storing more and more data as you go into S4, because the whole trend is to create more and more data. You will quickly go back into needing more and more of these memory blocks, whereas if you're archiving in S4 from the beginning, you will retain, like Carlsberg did, that sort of flat profile, and you will try and prevent yourself from needing to purchase this very expensive, may be fast, it may be excellent performance, but it is expensive, mixed hardware database that SAP have come in with HANA. So you can see those simple examples do show numbers. We've seen the Carlsberg savings, and there's your standard one just on a migration and going to cloud. That's just by planning ahead, working through the archiving. So people need comfort, and I hope I can give you some today. I said that ECC files are unreadable by anything than the system that created them. That is true, but the administrator can assign another system to it, so that as you migrate up, you can actually make those files available. And S4 can read archive files from ECC. So there is work to do, but it can be done. So the data you store, if you want it accessible by the new world, you can have that. I've already said to you that the data retention is secure and unreadable. There is this compliancy world of GDPR, and I'll come on to that in a moment. And then there's always tax and regulation, and you need the data available to be responsive to the authorities. Unfortunately, you have to do as you're told. So looking at the first one, when you go over to S4, your memory usage is typically 50-50. In the memory block, you have the data, resident data, and then you have the working data. And most people, for optimization, keep that at 50-50. And gradually, as data becomes less used because it's no longer the hot matter that's being processed at the time, the idea in S4 is that data is aged out, and cold data which hasn't been looked at and talked to is migrated to disk. Still available, but it's migrated down. Okay, and you, having done your aging, which is a manual process, which we automate, but after a period, the idea is you're sitting there in the 50-50 in a nice, pleasant, optimized world. Now, if you have something like a tax audit, you've got to go back and read that old, cold data, because typically the financial department need to question things that are older than what's in the memory. So it starts to return the age data. Now, if you're going to put a whole load of data back in, you're now going to upset the balance between 50-50. The cold data moves into the working memory space, and that will give you a slowdown in performance. You will not be able to have as much space available to do what you need to do. If you're keeping it optimized, that will give you a lower, slower response. However, if you archive, It is the working memory that reads direct into the archive. And therefore, it only takes up the data it needs for the short time it needs it and puts it back. You don't upset the 50-50 optimized environment for your HANA. There is a problem with aging. There's a company in the UK called British Telecom who have just moved away from Oracle and are going on to S4, a new S4 HANA implementation. And part of their processes, they have been testing and talking to SAP, and that the aging is not delivering what it's meant to. It does not work for FI, what we call FI information at this time. It works for technical objects. Technical objects being iDocs, logs, etc. And to be quite honest, why would you age iDocs and keep it on a disk if your iDocs are not relevant for any future tax purpose or regulatory purpose? And the only country where I know they can be under special circumstances is France. You would typically delete your iDocs, so you would archive them out to make sure it was done professionally, and after 6 months, 9 months, whatever period your retention rules say, you delete it. You would not age them, because aging does not get them out of the system. It leaves them in disk, and so you're putting data away that you don't really need to keep. Archiving, again, for iDocs and technical, has an advantage. You know where it is, you know, got it controlled, you can do it every 6 months and delete every 12 months. That is very important at the moment. I am absolutely sure SAP will fix the problem, but if you are going on to S4 today, or have gone on to S4, aging is not doing what was originally expected and claimed. So, moving out of that one, and I hope that's been specific enough. Data retention. Archiving files can be monitored. They can get, if you use an automation tool like us, they get named, you know who did it, you know where they were put, the system knows where they put. You can apply access authorities, the same ones that you've already set up in your system, so that anybody who didn't have access to, say, credit card numbers can't access the archive credit numbers, etc., etc. Those access authorities that are in the system apply to archive files just as much. So your archive files are safe. Archive files cannot be read externally, as I said in the overview. So the originating system is the only one that can, so they're unhackable from the outside. Yes, the administrator can redesignate the viewing system, but that requires sign off, etc., internally. So your data is secure. Your archive files can be migrated to S4, as I said, which means you're future-proof. At the end of the day, you are getting to a point where you've got the comfort. GDPR retention and destruction. Don't know what the marketplace is like within Norway, but I know in the UK, you will never ever be 100% GDPR compliant. No one will ever be there. All you can do is get to the point of being as good as you can be. And the regulator seems to be applying common sense at this time to companies as they work towards this. So if you do archiving, you can actually use the archiving mechanism as a blocking methodology to be on the route to compliancy, i.e. the archive files themselves are not readable, so they're safe, as we said, but it also means they don't have to be encrypted, so there's no cost element there. Some people do put them on encrypted servers, but there's no need to, because they cannot be read. The authority controls that you've specified in your system are applied, and you can add more authority controls so that no one, even if they did have the right to see the data in the live system, they would, under normal circumstances, see it in archive, but you can override that with the archive authorities and say, no, you can't. So you can seal down the control and be very compliant to how the interpretation of GDPR is currently going. And because the archiving tools that we implement will do deletion at the end of the period, you can make sure that you don't retain data. And this is where the American side of thing is. Don't keep anything once it's past its legal retention date, because there's no risk of somebody finding something they can sue you for there. Europe has a slightly different approach. We've always traditionally kept everything, but now personal data is within this. You've got to start thinking about deletion. The only weakness of doing your GDPR through archiving techniques rather than ILM techniques, and the ILM objects that SAP provide, including their tool, the SAP ILM product, can all be run within our tools. So ILM objects can be automated and run. And it's not a case in the ILM objects of running them once. You've got to repeat that probably annually to make sure you're not gathering up data. But when you do this purely on the archiving tools, the difference between ILM objects and ILM enabled objects against archiving objects, an ILM enabled object can be split open so that if there were 4 documents in there, one with a 5-year retention, one with a 10-year, one with a 15-year, and one with a 20, you can, after 5 years, get rid of the 5-year one and do it in sequence. But with archiving only, you would have to wait till the oldest date was reached. But because it's secure, no one can, or access is controlled, then I don't see that in the current state of GDPR as being a major infringement of the regulations. So tax compliancy, the last item there. Archiving itself supports the way you maintain your data for compliancy to tax and regulation. It is a best business practice. That's what SAP say, and so it's safe to follow that. Ensure your data as it was for future. So as I said to you at the beginning, there is that need to secure data relevant to the data that was in place at the time. And so it's not the address changes, the typical working things that go on are sealed down. And so you keep your data secure and you're not going to have problems with reproducing. And then naming conventions, very, very important. If you get people to do this manually, which is what you can do, the SAP objects are there, you can set them all up yourself, you can run them all. Maintaining the ability to get back to it is reliant on getting the right naming conventions in place, whether you're going per company, per plant, or whatever, so that it's the data, the archive data, is easy to get back to, meaning its future is safe for you. So all of those objects, those items, summing up, are becoming safe, secure, and future-proof. And archiving has a strong element in all of them. So I'm really heading towards the end of the presentation, and I thought I have a question. Do you data archive on S4? Do you data age on S4? Do you need to consider this now? Well, my answer is do it now, do not wait. You need to consider the archiving you have anyway. ECC should be archived to make it optimized. If you're going to migrate to S4, you should be thinking about reducing the volume in your ECC. So if your migration over is brownfield as a typical thing, I'm being told by SAP people are not doing the new installation and doing the greenfield. Therefore, it will be value for money to reduce your database before you migrate it over. And when you get on S4, because aging is not yet functioning the way it was intended, how quick do you start that? I would suggest to you that if you can afford it, put it in place from year one, because in year 2, year 3, you're starting to take your data out, not through aging, because it's not doing it. We did do some objects on S4 for a large client who's based partly in Ireland and partly in Paris, France, and we took all the data out on aging, and in 24 hours it had migrated itself back, and it kept doing it. We repeated the process on certain objects and it kept going back. This is where we first discovered that aging had its problems. We had to check it wasn't us and making it doing something wrong, and we went through it again and again, and it's definitely what happens. And now through BT and their questioning, we've had the product managers at SAP confirm there is a problem there. So archiving's been on the I need to do this agenda for too long. Nobody has given the priority to the practice, and they need to. It's not something you should ignore. It costs money to do archiving and can take a long period to gain the ROI. There's no bones about it. Your FD will not like you if you come up with a traditional proposal for archiving. But if you can show him the migration to S4 and the saving that you intend to make against the memory costs and the storage costs, then you've got an immediate ROI. So that may be a good way of doing it. And then there are large savings, as you can see, if your system is big enough and your volume of data is enough. There are large savings if you start that planning now, and it puts you in a good place once you're at S4, because all of us know in the SAP world, you should be archiving. And S4, despite all the claims 3 years ago, has proven that it actually generates more data. People are doing things that create more data because they can run faster on mobile apps and things like that. So the reality is there is even a bigger need to understand archiving and put it in the S4 environment. So I have reached a point of conclusion. I've 15 minutes to the end of the day. Are there any questions that you may have or I can take? Don't all speak at once.
Comments from Eva. I really like your presentation. Many points on things which we never heard about before, and it's so it's really, I think it's really interesting.
Thank you, Eva.
Do you have to unmute yourself to be able to say something?
If nobody else is going to start the ball rolling, then Lawrence, I was just thinking about, I mean, obviously you alluded to this at the end of the presentation, but I mean, there's obviously a cost to the TJC software licensing, and then there's obviously the cost of the archiving project. I'm not asking you for exact figures, but could you give some kind of indicative figures about, because I mean, obviously you talked a lot about savings, but I mean, this to a certain extent will be offset by the first time cost of the project and the purchase of the software.
Obviously, in the UK, because that's where most of my examples are, a typical archiving project would be between £50,000 and £70,000. would be numbers. Obviously, everybody's unique. Everybody has different objects and they require different things. But if where we start from, those are the typical figures that we're talking about. So if you were to use the returns that we see in Carlsberg, but not as big. So £50 per gigabyte, let's say we just take an arbitrary figure of £30 per gigabyte. And you started off with 7 terabytes, which is not a crazy size system, and you move it down to 4 terabytes, and that's 3 terabytes saved. Yeah, if that 30 is right, that's a £900,000 saving. If I've got my numbers right, am I correct? And you spent, say, £70,000 to do it, there is a definite saving there, but it doesn't come on day one. Your finance directors will have a requirement that projects need to show some return in 12 months or 18 months or 24 months. That's the way they work, and I understand why they work that way. But if you can't show it immediately, they will discard the project, which is why so many projects get put to the back burner. It is because it needs the length of time, year 1 and year 2, to often get those returns back. And then the key to it is you are then, if you continue archiving, you are saving that amount of the amount you've saved is then continuous, and you are doing that over a longer period. And so your depreciation costs of that software, let's say you bought it for £30,000, the piece of software. If you just do it for 2 years, it's £15,000 a year. But if that runs for 10 years, that cost gets stretched and just becomes a normal run-of-the-mill business as usual cost. And that's the thing with archiving. But when you look at the S4 migration, the cost in S4 is immediate, because you're now saying instead of needing 7 terabytes, just in round numbers, of memory, which we know per terabyte is £250,000, and if you've got 7 of them, you're going to need at least 8 blocks to do it. You'll need a little bit of growth and safety there. You've got £250,000, you've got about 4 million there. Well, if you can reduce that there and then to half of that, then you only need 2 million. So the saving that you could make in the S4, but it also means that you're doing your ECC now. And even if you're not going to migrate to S4 till 2023, you'll need now to 2023 to really do your archiving and work out what you can do the maximum of. Because most companies, we look at the top tables and we're looking at where can we pull out the most data, the most bang for your buck. That's great. But when you come into migration to S4, you might need to look at other things. Have you got historic master data? You should pull out, because if you migrate it and it never gets used, it's sitting there wasted. But you don't want to lose the data. So by archiving it out, you can get it into files where are re-accessible if you need to get to them. So there's the S4 migration opportunity is opening a door where good IT people and professionals can see an opportunity where they don't have to play the normal budgetary rules, which is often what stops archiving. Archiving is usually, projects are usually triggered by panic from the day something stops working because something's gone wrong. There's too much data. They go over the cliff in the database, and instead of it being slow, it virtually stops. And that's when they realize too late that they need to archive, and they go into panic mode. Some people start deleting data and everything just to get it back up and working. Not the best way of running your system. You think now, even if you never go to S4, you will still be doing a good job archiving your ECC now all the way up to end of life in 2025. And if SAP do not go end of life in 2025. They stretch it out a couple more years because there are a lot of companies that are behind the curve. It's going to do your business practices the world of good to be archiving. And then you have done the best you can to minimize that cost of that jump when you finally make it. That was the message I was trying to get over. Did I succeed?
Yes, I was a very clear message. Thank you.
Someone else having a question?
Hi, I'm Vineet here. I just have a question regarding when we do archiving for a project, like when we are going to migrate from ERP to S/4HANA. For example, if we take the case of Carlsberg, how much time you may need to do a logistic modules archive, data archiving, Lawrence?
I heard most of that for migrating from ECC to S4, but what was the last bit? I just didn't quite catch that wording.
What I was asking is what would be the project duration for this part for doing the archiving of logistics data in that case?
Well, let me just take you back up to one of those screens and we can look at it now. The one where, okay, on the left, that was December 2015. You can see that is the last bar of the bar chart. And we had been archiving since the August. So we started in August there and we had taken out 2.7 terabytes in those first 4 months. If you look, this is 4 years later, and it's a whole year, a rolling year. You can see that if you could imagine those, they come out every month, going for the last 4 years in between. You can see that you're getting your gains after, in the case of Carlsberg, after the first 4 or 5 months, you're starting to get a volume that becomes financially justifiable. Is that what you're asking me, or am I missing what you're saying?
Yeah, I got what you explained from the first part of the explanation, and then I have another question. So you're showing the graph, the chart in the right side. So we see that there is reduction in the data, and is that happening based on any? Are you running any background jobs continuously throughout this period for archiving?
Yes, well, the automation tool, which is known as the Archive Session Cockpit, ASC, that tool is an add-on that goes inside your SAP system. It's certified so that it's non-modifying. It's in our namespace, so it's been through all the SAP certification. It's safe for you. That when we create an object inside SAP, which is the standard SAP object, then it's customized to fit any changes you've made in the system, is then loaded into the ASC. Now the ASC then controls that and all the other objects completely itself. It knows what you've said. With this particular object is being run weekly or monthly. It's being run per company code, and you've got 50 companies in the country, in the company, 50 company codes. So to do your archiving for financial purposes, you have to run all 50 company codes once a week. Then you have to read those, check they've been done correctly. Then you move them into store, archive store, and then you go back and delete out the database. So Archive Session Cockpit manages all of that functionality all the way through. And you can also say, I only want Archive Session Cockpit to have 5 jobs available to it. You can also say you can't work on a Sunday because that's when we do this. You can't work on a Wednesday, or you can have any night 6 o'clock in the evening till 3 o'clock in the morning. So all the time windows, particularly when you're a global company, you can work out when you're allowed to run archiving, and the tool understands all that and follows the rules you've given it. So once you've set it up, once you've told it what to do, it will just go and do that in the windows that you've given it and with the number of jobs you said it can run simultaneously. Does that
Okay,
answer
thank
your
you.
question? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Any more questions? We're 5 to 9, sorry, 5 to 10 CET.
So Martin, do we then say thank you very much, or?
I was just waiting to see whether there was any more questions, but I think if there are no more questions, then yes, we would like to thank you very much, Lawrence.
Very happy
informative.
to do. Thank you very much, Martin.
Thanks a
Okay.
lot. And then we wish everyone
Thank
a
you.
nice weekend.
Absolutely.
Excellent. And I look forward to